But when they had their talk, for the first time Tom apologized to her in great detail for everything. "I'm sorry for pulling your hair. I'm sorry for taking drugs. I'm sorry for walking out on you." And this led her to say, "Well, I'm sorry too." Following his visit with us, Tom began saying, "Thank you." Tom had never said thank you for much of anything before. His conversations were now filled with thank yous. And the week after his visit here, Jane received this brief letter from him. "Dear Jane, I find it necessary to put in written word my thanks to you. We have shared so many ill feelings toward each other in the past, but the initial steps we took together last Saturday toward their resolution should be documented. And so, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to meet with Adam. Thank you for sharing the things you shared. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for the love from which we created our boy. Thank you for being his mother. I mean it as sincerely as can be." At the same time, he sent me a letter. Tom. "Dear Mike, I wanted to take a formal moment to thank you for putting Jane and me together with Adam. It has done more for my outlook toward my relationship with Jared and Jane than I can find the words for. Your desire to do what's right both now and in past years is quite commendable. Without your good offices, there is no telling how ugly things would have gotten between Jane and me. My deepest appreciation, Tom." When we received these letters, we were stunned. And in the phone conversations that followed, Jane said, "We talked almost like giddy school kids. The understanding, the letting go, the forgiving was so unleashing. So many good things are happening now. Jane even went so far as to say to me, maybe when Tom comes up here, we could let him use one of our cars." I had thought about that many times, but I didn't dare mention it for fear of being accused of taking his side. I thought her attitude would be, "How dare you? You're trying to accommodate the enemy." But now she is recommending it. She even said, "What would you think about letting Tom stay in our spare room to help with his costs?" And I thought, is this really Jane? It was a 180-degree turnaround. I'm sure there will be challenges ahead, but I believe the groundwork has been laid. The tools for appropriate communication are there. There's almost a feeling of deep respect now for one another, and a genuine concern that I see in Jane and Tom for each other and for our kids. It's been a real challenge at times, but through it all, it's been crystal clear to me that anything less than this would make life worse for everyone. Notice how Tom and Jane were able to rise above the hate, the blaming, and accusing. They were able to diffuse the conflict and act based on principles instead of reacting to each other. How did they do that? In seeking to understand each other, they both got psychological air. It freed them to stop fighting each other and to connect with their own inner gifts, particularly conscience and awareness. They became open, vulnerable. They were each able to acknowledge their part in the situation, to apologize, to forgive. And this healing, this cleansing, opened the door to more authentic relationships, to creating a synergy in which they were able to establish a better situation for their child, for themselves, and for everyone involved. As you can see in this story, and in every other story in this chapter, not seeking to understand leads to judgment, usually misjudgment, rejection, and manipulation. Seeking to understand leads to understanding, acceptance, and participation. Obviously, only one of these paths is built on the principles that create quality family life. Probably more than any other single factor, what gets families off track and gets in the way of synergy is negative emotions, including anger and taking offense. Temper gets us into problems, and pride keeps us there. As C.S. Lewis said, pride is competitive in nature. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition has gone, pride has gone. One of the most common and debilitating forms of pride is the need to be right, to have it your way. Again, remember, even if anger services only 0.1% of the time, that will affect the quality of all the rest of the time, because people are never sure when that raw nerve might be touched again. I know of one father who is pleasant and agreeable most of the time, but on occasion his vicious temper was aroused. And this affected the quality of all the rest of the time, because family members had to brace themselves for the possibility that it might happen again. They would avoid social situations for fear of embarrassment. They would walk around minefields throughout the day to avoid stepping on a raw nerve. They never became authentic or real or opened up. They never dared to give him feedback for fear that it would stir up the anger more than ever. And without feedback, this man lost all contact with what was really happening in his family. When someone in the family becomes angry and loses control, the effects are so wounding, so intimidating, so threatening, so overpowering that others lose their bearings. They tend to either fight back, which only exacerbates the problem, or capitulate and give in to this win-lose spirit. And then even compromise is not likely. The more likely scenario is that people will separate and go their own ways, refusing to communicate at all about anything meaningful. They try to live with the satisfactions of independence, since interdependence seems too hard, too far off, and too unrealistic, and no one has the mindset or the skill set to go for it. This is why it is so important when this kind of culture has developed for people to go deep within themselves. Then they can do the necessary work within to acknowledge their negative tendencies, to overcome them, to apologize to others, and to process their experiences so that gradually those labels are unfrozen and people can come to trust the basic structure, the basic relationship again. Of course, some of the most important inner work is prevention work. It includes making up our minds not to say or do those things we know will offend and learning to overcome our anger or to express it at better times and in more productive ways. We need to be deeply honest with ourselves and realize that most anger is merely guilt overflowing when provoked by the weakness of another. We can also make up our minds not to be offended by others. Taking offense is a choice. We may be hurt, but there is a big difference between being hurt and taking offense. Being hurt is having our feelings wounded, and it does smart for a time. But taking offense is choosing to act on that hurt by getting back, getting even, walking out, complaining to others, or judging the offender. Most of the time, offenses are unintentional. Even when they are intentional, we can remember that forgive, like love, is a verb. It's the choice to move from reactivity to proactivity, to take the initiative, whether you've offended someone or been offended yourself, to go and make reconciliation. It's the choice to cultivate and depend on an internal source of personal security so that you are not so vulnerable to external offenses. And above all, it's the choice to prioritize the family, to realize that family is too important to let offenses keep family members from talking to one another, prevent grown brothers and sisters from going to family events, or weaken or break the intergenerational and extended family ties that provide such strength and support. Interdependency is hard. It takes tremendous effort, constant effort, and courage. It's much easier in the short run to live independently inside a family, to do your own thing, to come and go as you wish, to take care of your own needs, and to interact as little as possible with others. But the real joys of family life are lost. When children grow up with this kind of modeling, they think that is the way family is, and the cycle continues. The devastating effect of these cyclical cold wars is almost as bad as the destruction of the hot wars. It's often important to process negative experiences, to talk them through, resolve them, Empathize with each other and seek forgiveness. Whenever ugly experiences take place, you can unfreeze them by acknowledging your part in them and by listening empathically to understand how other people saw them and how they felt about them. In other words, by modeling vulnerability yourself, you can help others become vulnerable. The deepest bonding arises out of such mutual vulnerability. You minimize the psychic and social scarring and clear the path to the creation of rich synergy. Really listening to get inside another person's mind and heart is called empathic listening. It's listening with empathy. It's trying to see the world through someone else's eyes. Of 5 different kinds of listening, it is the only one that really gets inside another person's frame of reference. You can ignore people, you can pretend to listen, you can listen selectively or even attentively, but until you listen empathically, you're still inside your own frame of reference. You don't know what constitutes a win for others. You don't really know how they see the world, how they see themselves, and how they see you. At one time, I was in Jakarta, Indonesia, teaching the principle of empathic listening. As I looked out over the audience and saw many people wearing earphones, a thought came to me. I said, if you want a good illustration of empathic listening, just think about what the interpreter or translator is doing right now through your earphones. These translators were doing instantaneous translation, which meant that they had to be listening to what I was saying at the moment, as well as restating what I had just said. It took incredible mental effort and concentration, and it required 2 translators to work in tandem based on their level of fatigue. Both of those translators came up to me afterward and told me that what I had said was the finest compliment they had ever been given. Even though you may be emotionally involved in a particular exchange with somebody, you can push your pause button and step outside of that emotion if you simply change the way you see your role, if you think of yourself as a faithful translator. Your job then is to translate and communicate back to the other person in new words the essential meaning, both verbal and nonverbal, of what that person communicated to you. In doing this, you're not taking a position yourself on what the person is talking about. You're simply feeding back the essence of what he or she said to you. Psychologist and author John Powell has said, listening in dialogue is listening more to meanings than to words. In true listening, we reach behind the words, see through them to find the person who is being revealed. Listening is a search to find the treasure of the true person as revealed verbally and nonverbally. There is the semantic problem, of course. The words bear a different connotation for you than they do for me. Consequently, I can never tell you what you said, but only what I heard. I will have to rephrase what you have said and check it out with you to make sure that what left your mind and heart arrived in my mind and heart intact and without distortion. Now let's go through a scenario together that will help us get at the heart of the understanding or faithful translator response. Suppose for several days you've sensed that your teenage daughter is unhappy. When you've asked her what's wrong, she's replied, "Nothing. Everything's okay." But one night while you're washing dishes together, she begins to open up. "Our family rule that I can't date until I'm older is embarrassing me to death. All my friends are dating, and that's all they can talk about. I feel like I'm out of it. John keeps asking me out, and I have to keep telling him I'm not old enough. I just know he's going to ask me to go to the party on Friday night, and if I have to tell him no again, he'll give up on me. So will Carol and Mary. Everyone's talking about it." How would you respond? "Don't worry about it, honey. No one is going to give up on you." Tell me what they're saying about you. When they talk about you like that, they're really admiring you for your stand. What you're feeling is normal insecurity. Any one of these might be a typical response, but not an understanding one. "Don't worry about it, honey. No one is going to give up on you." This is an evaluating or judging response based on your values and your needs. Just stick to your guns. Don't worry about what others say and think. This is advising from your point of view or in terms of your needs. Tell me what they're saying about you. This response is probing for information you feel is important. When they talk about you like that, they're really admiring you for your stand. What you're feeling is normal insecurity. This is interpreting what's happening with your daughter's friends and inside her as you see it. Most of us either seek first to be understood, or if we do seek to understand, we are often preparing our response as we listen. So we evaluate, advise, probe, or interpret from our own point of view. And none of these is an understanding response. They all come out of our autobiography, our world, our values. So what would an understanding response be? First, it would attempt to reflect back what your daughter feels and says so that she feels you really understand. For example, you might say, "You feel kind of torn up inside. You understand the family rule about dating, but you also feel embarrassed when everyone else can date and you have to say no. Is that it?" Then she might respond, "Yes, that's what I mean." And she might continue, "But the thing I'm really afraid of is that I won't know how to act around boys when I do start dating. Everyone else is learning and I'm not." Again, an understanding response would reflect back, "You feel somewhat scared that when the time comes, you won't know what to do." She might say yes and go on further and deeper into her feelings. Or she might say, "Well, not exactly. What I really mean is," and she would go on to try to give you a clearer picture of what she's feeling and facing. If you look back at the other responses, you'll see that none of them accomplishes the same results as the understanding response. When you give an understanding response, both of you gain a greater understanding of what she's really thinking and feeling. You make it safe for her to open up and share. You make it comfortable for her to engage her own inner gifts to help deal with the concern. And you build the relationship which will prove immensely helpful further down the road. Let's look at another experience that shows the difference between the typical and the empathetic response. Consider the contrast in these two conversations between Cindy, a varsity cheerleader, and her mother. In the first, Cindy's mother seeks first to be understood. Cindy: "Oh, Mom, I have some bad news. Maggie got dropped from the cheer squad today." Mother: "Why?" Cindy: "She was caught in her boyfriend's car on the school grounds, and he was drinking. If you get caught drinking on the school grounds, you get in big trouble. Actually, it's not fair because Maggie wasn't drinking, just her boyfriend was drunk." "Well, Cindy, I think it serves Maggie right for keeping bad company. I've warned you that people will judge you by your friends. I've told you that 100 times. I don't see why you and your friends can't understand. I hope that you learn a lesson from this. Life is tough enough without hanging around with someone like that guy. Why wasn't she in class? I hope you were in class when all this was going on. You were, weren't you?" Cindy: "Mom, it's okay. Mellow out. Don't get so mad. It wasn't me. It was Maggie. Gosh, all I wanted to do was tell you something about somebody else, and I get the 10-minute lecture on my bad friends. I'm going to bed." Now look at the difference when Cindy's mother seeks first to understand. Cindy: "Oh, Mom, I have some bad news. Maggie got dropped from the cheer squad today." "Oh, honey, you really seem upset." "I feel so bad about it, Mom. It wasn't her fault. It was her boyfriend's. He's a jerk." You don't like him." "I sure don't, Mom. He's always in trouble. She's a good girl and he drags her down. It makes me sad." You feel he's a bad influence on her, and that hurts you because she's your good friend. "I wish she'd drop this guy and go with someone nice. Bad friends get you in trouble." Notice how this mother's desire to understand was reflected in the way she responded to her daughter the second time. At that point, she didn't attempt to share her own experience or ideas, even though she may have had real value to add. She didn't evaluate, probe, advise, or interpret. And she didn't take Cindy on, although she may have disagreed with what her daughter seemed to be saying. What she did was respond in a way that helped clarify her own understanding of what Cindy was saying and communicate that understanding back to Cindy. And because Cindy didn't have to engage in a win-lose conversation with her mother, She was able to connect with her four gifts and come to a sense of the real problem on her own. Now, it's not always necessary to reflect back in words what someone is saying and feeling in order to empathize. The heart of empathy is understanding how people see the situation and how they feel about it, and the essence of what they are trying to say. It's not mimicking. It's not necessarily summarizing. It's not even attempting to reflect back in all cases. You may not need to say anything at all. Or perhaps a facial expression will communicate that you understand. The point is that you don't get hung up on the technique of reflecting back, but instead focus on truly empathizing, and then allow that genuine, sincere emotion to drive your technique. The problem comes when people think the technique is empathy. They mimic, use the same phrases repeatedly, and rephrase what others say in ways that seem manipulative or insulting. It's like the story about the serviceman who was complaining to the chaplain about how much he hated army life. The chaplain responded, "Oh, you don't like army life?" "Yeah," said the serviceman, "and that CO, I couldn't trust him as far as I could throw him." "You just feel that you couldn't trust the CO as far as you could throw him." "Yeah, and the food, it's so plain." "You feel that the food is really plain." "And the people, they're so low caliber." "You feel that the people are low caliber." "Yeah, and what in the heck is wrong with the way I'm saying it anyway?" It may be good to practice the skill. It may even increase the desire. But always remember that the technique is just the tip of the iceberg. The great mass of the iceberg is a deep and sincere desire to truly understand. That desire is ultimately based on respect. This is what keeps empathic listening from becoming just a technique. If this sincere desire to understand isn't there, efforts to empathize will be sensed as manipulative and insincere. Manipulation means that the real motive is hidden, even though good techniques are being used. When people feel manipulated, they are not committed. They may say yes, but they mean no, and it will be evidenced in their behavior later on. Pseudo-democracy eventually shows its true colors. And when people feel manipulated, a major withdrawal takes place, and your next efforts, even though sincere, will be perceived as another form of manipulation. When you're willing to acknowledge the true motive behind your methods, then truthfulness and sincerity replace manipulation. Others may not agree or go along, but at least you have been forthright. And nothing baffles a person who is full of tricks and duplicity more than simple, straightforward honesty on the part of another. Based on respect and a sincere desire to understand, responses other than reflective responses can also become empathic. If someone were to ask you, "Where's the restroom?" you wouldn't just respond, "You're really hurting." There are also times when, if you really understand, you can sense that someone wants you to probe. They want the additional perspective and insight your questions are based on. So in this case, probing becomes empathic rather than controlling and autobiographical. When you sense that someone really wants you to ask questions to draw them out, you might consider questions such as these. What are your concerns? What is truly important to you? What values do you want to preserve the most? What are your most pressing needs? What are your highest priorities in this situation? What are the possible unintended consequences of such an action plan? These kinds of questions can be combined with reflective statements such as, "I sense your underlying concern is," correct me if I'm wrong, but I sense that I'm trying to see it from your point of view, and what I sense is, what I hear you saying is, you feel that, I sense you mean, in the right situation, any of these questions and phrases could show an attempt to achieve understanding or empathy. The point is that the attitude or desire is what must be cultivated first and foremost. The technique is secondary and flows out of the desire. As you work on Habit 5, you may be interested in the answers to some of the questions other people have asked over the years. Is empathy always appropriate? The answer is yes. Without exception, empathy is always appropriate. But reflecting back, summarizing, and mirroring are sometimes extremely inappropriate and insulting. They may even be perceived as manipulation. So remember, the heart of the matter is a sincere desire to understand. What can you do if the other person doesn't open up? Remember that 70 to 80% of all communication is nonverbal. In this sense, you cannot not communicate. If you truly have an empathic heart, a heart that desires to understand, you will always be reading the nonverbal cues. You'll be noticing body and face language, tone of voice, and context. Voice inflection and tone are the keys to discerning the heart on the phone. You'll be attempting to discern the spirit and heart of another, so don't force it. Be patient. You may even sense that you need to apologize or make restitution for some wrongdoing. Act on that understanding and do it. In other words, if you sense that the emotional bank account is overdrawn, act on that understanding and make the appropriate deposits. What are other expressions of empathy besides mirroring, summarizing, and reflecting techniques? Again, the answer is to do what the mass of the iceberg tells you, what your understanding of the person, the need, and the situation direct you toward. Sometimes total silence is empathic. Sometimes asking questions or using expert knowledge showing conceptual awareness is empathic. Sometimes a nod or a single word is empathic. Empathy is a very sincere, non-manipulative, flexible, and humble process. You realize you're on sacred ground and that the other person is perhaps even a little more vulnerable than you. You may also find these guidelines helpful. The higher the trust level, the more you can easily move in and out of empathic and autobiographical responses, particularly between reflecting and probing. Negative and positive energy is often, though not always, a key indicator of the level of trust. If the trust is very high, you can be extremely candid and efficient with each other. But if you're attempting to rebuild trust, or if it is somewhat shaky and the person won't risk vulnerability, then you need to stay longer and with more patience in the empathic mode. If you're not sure that you understand, or if you're not sure the other feels understood, then say that and try again. Just as you come from the depth of the iceberg under the water, learn to listen to the depth of the iceberg inside the other person. In other words, focus primarily on the underlying meaning, which is usually found more in feeling and emotion than in content or the words the person is using. Listen with the eyes and with the third ear, the heart. The quality in a relationship is perhaps the factor that most determines what is appropriate. Remember that relationships in the family require constant attention because the expectation of being emotionally nurtured and supported is constant. This is where people get into trouble, when they take others, particularly their loved ones, for granted and treat a stranger at the door better than the dearest people in their lives. There must be constant effort in the family to apologize, to ask for forgiveness, to express love, appreciation, and the valuing of others. Read the context, the environment, the culture, so that the technique you use is not interpreted differently from what you intended. Sometimes you have to be very explicit by saying, "I'm going to try to understand what you mean. I am not going to evaluate, agree, or disagree at all. I am not going to try to figure you out. I want to understand only what you want me to understand." And that understanding often comes only when you also understand the bigger picture. When you're truly empathizing, you're also understanding what's going on in the relationship and in the nature of the communication taking place between you, not just in the words the other person is attempting to communicate. You're empathic about the whole context as well as the meaning that is being communicated, and then you act based on that larger empathic understanding. For instance, if the entire history of the relationship is of judging and evaluation, the very effort to empathize will probably be seen in that context.